what you get when you allow economists to pick the title. So what I'd like to do is generally give an outlook, but preview it with what we're facing currently as what many refer to as a shortage or perceived shortage. So who uses the word shortage? Corey, I've been driving with him all week. He's guilty as anyone, right? So we were in Osceola. We heard there was a potato shortage. Yesterday, I tried to get the waitress to tell us we had a chicken fried steak shortage, but she didn't take the bait. But this is very commonplace, right? You'll see a lot of news articles like this, right? We even have a everything shortage. New York Times coined that term, given if you go to order something, it seems like there's a shortage, or that is what's blamed in that. Now, I don't know if anyone is familiar with The Onion. It's a satirical magazine out of Madison, Wisconsin, where I'm from. They do kind of a play on the situation. They come up with reasons why we have a shortage. You can see the laundry list there. They're obviously ridiculous reasons. And hopefully I motivate this, because the reason we have shortages, if they do exist, is because of somewhat the ridiculous nature of why we're allowing them to exist. So hopefully, as I walk through this, I convince you that we should embrace the situation of very strong demand and reduce supplies, because that will allow us to eventually increase prices and incentivize innovation, incentivize production. These are two of my more favorite jokes on the situation. The one on your right there actually kind of came about or came into play. I was talking with my neighbor, who we were at the women's basketball game last weekend, and they were commenting that 2 years ago they were at the women's Big 12 championship in Kansas City, and when they got there, everything was fine. They had heard some things about COVID. By the end of the first game, it was like, we're sending fans home. And then by the time they were going back to our hotel, it's Big 12 championship is closed. Everyone get home. This COVID thing was blowing up. On their way home, the sister called and said, go get toilet paper, right? The stores, they're getting bare. So they went to a store and got the toilet paper. There was one shelf that was just stocked. They filled up their car. My neighbor said it's still sitting in our basement, right where we left it, right? Now, did they need that toilet paper? No. But there was a lot of emotion to that, right? That his sister had called and said, the sky is falling, go get toilet paper. There's a lot of commodities like that. We'll talk more about meat. Gas, I think, is kind of the quintessential example. So pictures like this are very commonplace, right? Where we fill up gas jugs normally. There could be lines there. If you bring your kid, you get an extra jug, right? There's fights in those lines. But you've seen cases where people are filling up garbage cans, Rubbermaid bins, right? Here, fill it up. And this might be the most extreme example, right? So I was in North Carolina last May when the coastal pipeline had a cyber attack, right? And you heard the governors coming out and saying, we don't have a gas shortage. Prices are going to stay where they're at. Well, what does this cause? This young lady is filling up gas in a shopping bag, right? And then I was staying here, and I didn't take this picture, I found it online, but I seen pictures similar to this. Well, here she's tying it, and I figured, all right, this is a bad idea. Let's just leave it, right? The situation, it got bad enough. Nope, she just went to double bag here. And then she had to move her groceries over to the side to put in the gas, right? And you had pictures like this, where do not fill the plastic bags with gasoline, please, from the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. Right? This is what causes shortages, right? This is part of the reason. It's the emotion, it's the hoarding behavior. But this explains why. So this sign is very accurate right here. Closed due to shortage. What do you also notice in this picture? On the top left and right. What's the price of gas? So why should it surprise us that people are doing stuff like this? or like this. So when I was in North Carolina and seeing like this, I was on the Outer Banks, and everyone's familiar with the Outer Banks. And I don't go on vacation a lot. This is once in a 5-year kind of thing. Our family was out there, and we didn't have much gas. I needed to get back to Raleigh. I would have moved that decimal point plenty of places there to get gas if I needed to. I can guarantee that we wouldn't be doing this. The price of gas was $29 per gallon, right? To ration this type of demand in the marketplace. So as an economist, and that's all I know how to speak like, unfortunately, my wife says, well, we should expect higher prices if we have an increase in demand. And do we have an increase in demand for a lot of goods? Certainly we do. Do we have a decrease in supply? Certainly we do, as we talk about supply chain challenges, higher cost of production. So we should expect a much higher price being paid for those commodities. Now, unfortunately, we are creating some shortages because of pricing behavior. So during COVID, what did you hear a lot of? We will prosecute to the fullest extent any price gouging, right? Well, as a retailer, how do I know if I'm price gouging, right? Or where does that cutoff start and begin, right? It costs me a heck of a lot more to get the product. And so, in sense, we are artificially holding that price down. Like, if the price of meat or toilet paper, whatever that was much higher, would we have seen the hoarding behavior that occurred? No, and not letting the bare shelves that occurred. Also, I think that beyond the statutory or legal reason, there's a lot of reputation effect here. Do you want to be the business that charged 2, 3, 4 times as much during a disaster, during a disruption, than what the normal price was? This becomes very clear to me. So growing up, we owned a propane gas business. My dad was always busy. Now he likes to stay busy, but he was delivering gas in the middle of the night. He was delivering gas on the weekends. And finally, I realized why. It's because he didn't charge any different price, right? Because he cared about going to church and saying, people, you know, why did you charge me so much more for gas? Or why is the price of gas so much? Or why did you charge me that weekend fee, right? And I think that occurs a lot too. So we artificially hold that price down and we create these shortages. Economists will tell you that having those price controls are going to create more problems than they're intended to fix. So if we let the free market happen, market will resolve itself much quicker than if we artificially hold that price down. In 10 years, this might be the best thing I've ever written because I think people actually read it, because I did get some comments on discussing why, you know, what we're facing is an increased scarcity, not a shortage. And you can see an article here in Wallace's Farmer. If you do anything out of my presentation, please go to Lake Superior State University and type in the word shortage for their 2023 banished words. So this is kind of I want to say it's a joke, but they have an annual banished words. 2022 did not have supply chain, or did not have shortage, it had supply chain on it. But I'm on a campaign here to get banished words of shortage on the 2023 list. So what does that mean for the pork industry? So as we look at pork prices currently, and I just pulled USDA, very aggregated prices here for ground pork, and Bureau of Labor Statistics prices for bacon, you'll see those prices are at or above record prices. These are not adjusted for inflation, but just looking at these nominal values. What you don't hear is, do we have a shortage of local ground pork or a shortage of organic bacon? You ever hear that? You'll hear we have a shortage of bacon, right? So my favorite bacon shortage story is Dr. Steve Meyer was on Sports Center. Did you see that, Joe?
Scott Van Pelt show.
Exactly, right? Like he made it. I would have just retired that, right? And what do they call him? The king of
They called
bacon?
it-
Or?
No, a god among men or
Oh,
something.
man,
Like,
but you made it, right?
His head
Yeah.
got great big for a long time, yeah.
But there's bacon shortage, right? And every couple of years that pops up, right? The bacon shortage. But we don't have a shortage of organic bacon, right? Because the price equates to supply and demand. Currently, that premium dictates about $10 for organic bacon. Now, if demand slips or supply increases organic bacon, all else equal, what will happen? That price will fall, right? And vice versa. Now, what is driving our prices, or what's inflation? You'll hear a lot talked about other various type factors. Economists will tell you it's two factors. Demand pull. We have a lot of money in the economy, right? It's chasing less and less goods. Supply chain issues are part of that. Now, cost pushflation is higher costs across the board. We'll talk a lot about those costs, and less product. So we're spreading that over less product. Now, a lot of times these factors aren't hitting us both in the face, right? One may be leading, one may be lagging. I'll argue in the current situation, they're both coalescing to really be driving these prices. As far as demand pull, economists, we like to measure demand, both looking at the quantity and the price. So here on this graph, a green is a positive shift in demand, or red is a negative shift in demand. Now you can get that multiple ways. So you can see an increase in quantity, but if you need a lower price to clear the market, depending on how much lower that price is, you may see an increase in demand, no change in demand, or a decrease in demand. From 14 to 15, we ate a lot more pork, needed a slightly lower price to clear the market, but the quantity consumed offset any lower price. So big increase in demand. 15, 16, 17 to 18 was actually a decrease in demand. It wasn't because we're eating less pork. It was because the price needed to clear that quantity was lower. Now, as you looked 18 to 19, obvious increase in demand here. Ate more, paid more for it. The last couple of years, it's been decreasing quantity consumed, but a higher price has offset that. So over the last 3 years, that pie has gotten bigger. The total dollars available for the industry have gotten bigger. But now we're thinking about 2022, right? Where it's again, a decreased quantity, lower supplies of hogs, lower supplies of pork. It's going to be a higher price. Pretty obvious as we look at how 2022 has started and forecast moving forward. Will that higher price be enough to offset the lower quantity? And then importantly, how much longer can this occur, right? And that's why eventually expectation, we all will incentivize increased production. We all be able to follow through on that production, and we will see increasing supplies available to consumers. Cold storage levels are at historically low levels. That's something we've really seen since spring of 2020. This is both an indication of supply and demand. So yes, we're producing less. So that is tightening up our supplies in cold storage. But demand has been so strong, it doesn't pay to put a lot of the product into cold storage. Now that still does occur. We have seen a ramp up in bellies, which typically seasonally occurs in late part of the year and early part of the year as we get into kind of the season where there's much stronger demand for bacon, the belly products. Export markets, this graph continues to get busier and busier because I continue to add more and more countries to this. Why do I do that? Because these countries have seen tremendous growth over the last several years. So that portfolio has gotten bigger and bigger for the U.S. pork market for exports. Now, that's a good thing because that means a lot of times your second best market isn't all that bad of a market. China, for example, has been really a star market the last couple of years, but is down considerably in 2022. I think there was expectations of that, but that market share will go to another country And again, that country is not all that bad of a second best destination. We've seen a lot of increase in some of these emerging countries or smaller countries over the last several years. That's why even we're comparing to a high base last year, so we're seeing some larger year-over-year declines. USDA has us down about 3% in 2022 compared to 2021. That follows a similar decline last year. Now, many may say, well, that's kind of a bad signal for export demand, right? And that's roughly 30% of our product. So do we got to be worried? We'll go to my next slide here. So the same thing that affects domestic demand, both quantity and price, is on the export market. So we need to take into consideration the value that those customers are paying for our pork exports. U.S. Meat Export Federation has a handy little calculation I love to use because it really equates it to the dollars that are meaningful for the industry. So we can find the pork export value per head slaughter. 2020 was $59. 2021, 62, almost $63 per hundredweight. So lower quantity exported, but higher value. So that helped offset it. Overall, a higher value per head marketed in 2021. I think there's a lot of expectations we'll see similar levels likely here in 2022, driven by the higher value. Certainly expectation that we're going to likely see lower quantity being shipped. That's the demand pull. Cost push is highlighted by this. So the blue line here is 2021 inputs paid by farmers. That compares to 2020 levels and the 5-year average. You'll note that across the board, the blue line is higher than the rest, right? We've seen a notable increase in inputs paid by farmers. A lot of the tension here is on feed grains, or that's where I've spent historically most of my time when understanding and estimating cost of production, because that's where we see the most variability, right? I started in 2012 when we had a drought and we had $7, $8 corn prices. We got down to $3 corn again, and now we're back up, right? So there's where most of the variability has been. You can also complete feeds, concentrate, supplements, but now I'm spending a lot more attention on some of these other non-feed variable costs that are becoming a larger share, at least a larger increase year over year when you look at those costs. And these are rather sticky costs too. I like to think this when you think about wages. So now that you've increased wage rates to retain employees, to get employees, can you come to next year and say, we're going to decrease your wage? Likely not, right? They're going to find somewhere else to work. A lot of these costs are here to stay. They're kind of those inflationary costs. Once they've made the jump, they're sticky. They're going to stay there. So even though we may see lower feed prices, it takes something to get there, right? But the higher cost of production from these other factors is going to limit how much reduction we possibly can see. Wage rates are an interesting one. So, I know I'm on a soapbox here that shortages don't exist. Every day I talk myself into and talk myself out of, do we have a labor shortage? Because wage rates have certainly increased, right? But the data says we can't attract more workers. You look at unemployment rates after the big bump from COVID, we're back down to the levels we were prior to COVID, about 4% unemployment rates. Bureau of Labor Statistics has a neat little calculation where they say the number of unemployed persons per job opening. So if you want to hire someone today, you can expect to get 60% of a person. And that assumes they would work 100% already, right? If you think about vocation of some agriculture jobs, the type of work of some agriculture jobs, that might be even lower than that, right? And that's regardless of these wage rates increasing. So it might not all just be wage rates. Or, COVID, you do a lot of reading, really COVID changed how people think about work, right? It's now I work to live. Maybe sometimes before it was live to work. So I think this, while likely will improve. We're probably not back to, what we had historically seen as some of those labor participation rates. So putting a bow on all that, what does this mean for cost of production? Cost of production is much, much higher than we've seen in a long time. You have to go back to 2012, 2013 for these cost of production levels. 2020 to 2021, my model for fair to finish production here in Iowa said we increased just south of 30%. That's about a $36 per head increase. Now this year, my forecast is about $89 per hundredweight. A lot of that's due to higher costs. If I go back to these, anticipated higher costs in 2022. I've also made an adjustment to some of these non-feed variable costs, the sticky factors that we need to account for over time. So that is embodied in some of that increase here, but already without even that adjustment, we were well over a 2-year 30% increase in cost. From a profitability, how does that equate? Well, we have the highest production cost since 12-13, but rather high prices, second to only 2014. That gives us similar profitability levels to 2021. This model assumes very naive marketing, no risk management, just hand them out marketing. Joel will talk a lot more about marketing options in this current market. Now, even though we've seen some of these highest costs, we've seen weights still remain rather large. I think this is kind of indicative of the marketing situation out there. There's a lot of incentive to add weight to hogs as we're seeing tight supplies, even though we have this higher cost of production. I don't think we're backed up in the marketplace by any means, but processing capacity has been slowed at times. I think it's certainly been picking up in the last couple of weeks. And hog values are very high, right? And so I think you're seeing packers work on both producer-owned hogs, but also possibly packer-owned hogs, and why maybe those weights are a little bit lower compared to year-ago levels. The hog and pigs report is rather dated at this point, given we'll see a new one here in about a month or so. I want to focus in on these marketing numbers as we're expecting them below year-ago levels. These came in even below pre-report expectations, and in actuality, slaughter levels have been even much tighter. So part of the appreciation in the marketplace is due to just rather tighter supplies than anticipated. The hog and pigs report headed at 5% below year-ago levels. If we look since December 1, we've been down about 7%. That's about a day's worth of slaughter, 500,000 head or so. This blue line is very important here. So that's Dr. Steve Meyer's estimate of processing capacity in the industry. That's a theoretical in the sense that it's saying everything is operating properly. There's no issues with labor, no issues with CO2, all those supply chain challenges we've dealt with. You'll notice that slaughter levels are well below those levels, but realizing this is probably lower than that, given we're still dealing with some of those challenges. How do I know or suspect we're dealing with those challenges? Well, you can just simply look at the spread between bone-in and boneless hams. So the value proposition that packers are able to get from boning those hams. So that spread here, due to arbitrage, can only get so wide if we have available labor, right? If there's a lot of value to be had in boneless hams, it pays to bone those hams. Now, as we got into COVID and challenges with processing capacity and labor challenges, backup of hogs and so on and so forth, that spread got rather large. Now, as we go to current, that's about as large as it's ever been. That's about a month old, and yes, the spread has been narrowing slightly, but overall we maintain pretty wide levels. Now, this is partially due to demand too, right? So there's very strong demand for boneless hams, otherwise those prices would decline. Back to my shortage argument, right? Byproduct values are near record highs. We have to go back to July 2014 for as high as we've seen these byproduct values. These are due to, again, strong demand for exports, tighter supplies. I think we're saving less byproduct to simplify some of that processing, and demand remains incredible for the other commodity that's less and less talked about. And that's oils or greases or fats. Those are up 75 to 100% year over year. What's this all mean collectively for prices? Well, I'm going to take 3 price forecasts here and give a composite, so then you can blame all of us together or none of us. So you have the Livestock Marketing Information Center, USDA, and then myself, who I just use futures price and adjust for an Iowa basis. So those would be annual numbers for 2020, 2021, and 2022. 2020, we had an average of about $60 per hundredweight. I say that compares favorably to these major disruption years, not to downplay 2020 or downplay any of those other ones, but to show some of the resiliency here, right? If you would have said in the heat of the situation, the second quarter of 2020, that we would average $60, $61 per hundredweight for hogs, they would have surprised many, right, given that situation. But the market bounced back rather quickly. That's a lot due to demand, but also able to work through those supply chain challenges. 2021 averaged about $90 per hundredweight. And 2022, kind of a spread between 87 to 96. I did have the benefit of about a week here and using futures prices. Now, again, these are from the 16th. A lot has happened since the 16th, right? Hopefully Joe tells us all about that here next, so I'll leave him on the hook for that. But overall, again, highest prices since 2014, where we averaged almost $101 per hundredweight for the year. Long-term prices here, provided by USDA and an institute out of the University of Missouri, have a 10-year average of about $69 per hundredweight. But note that they're starting 2022 at a much lower value than what the forecasts are suggesting currently. So that has some implications where if we're starting at a much higher value, even though I think expectations hog prices could decline longer term here, how far is that decline? So I think there's some optimism of longer term optimism, just given where we're starting here in 2022. I want to briefly touch on processing capacity and how that relates to resilience. Why is that notable? Well, coming out of the administration, January 3rd, they made an announcement, a laundry list of things to look at fairer, more competitive, more resilient meat and poultry supply chains. A lot of this is targeted at the cattle and beef industry, but this is overall meat and poultry. And there's been talk of processing capacity across those and the diversification of that and how that relates to resiliency. This is how I best describe resiliency in processing. And it doesn't matter if I put cattle up here, if I put hogs up here, the story is very similar. So here in the United States, if you look at federally inspected hog slaughter, which is 99.9% almost of the slaughter, there is 621 hog plants. Most of that production, again, is market hogs, barrows, and gills. 389, or just shy of 2/3 of those plants, slaughter between 1 and 999 head per year. I do some simple math, 51 slaughtered weeks per year, do 5 shifts plus a Saturday shift, I get to 1 head per day. That's what they average. Some would do more, some would do less, that's their average, right? But they slaughter 0.1% of the hog volume out there. And what is this targeted at? Small and medium processing, right? That's what the target there is. Now, if I look at large packers, so I do 4 million plus per year, there's 14 of them. They do 58% of the volume. They do 20,000 head a day. So when we talk about resiliency, 500,000 head, simple math, of hog slaughter per day, If I lose 35%, why do I choose 35%? That's about what a week's slaughter loss was during COVID, during the height of COVID, early May of 2020. Well, 5 days of that, you get about 900,000 head backed up in a week. You did that a couple of weeks. So if we had more smallish 200 head per day packers, how fast could we eat up that backlog of hogs? There's quite a few of these, right? There's 54 of these 200 head a day. So be between this category here. We'll take 100 extra days. Do we have 100 extra days to slaughter market ready hogs? Not an animal scientist, nutritionist. I'm not a veterinarian, but even economists could say no, right? Or you need 100 brand new 200 head per day packing plants. And we could scale that all you want here, right? But what does that mean? Lockett's talked about the efficiencies of scale or economies of size, but I'll just point to the sheer abilities of size, right? If we want to provide pork worldwide to that laundry list, that huge portfolio, and domestically, you know, this system is set up very efficiently and very effectively. So when I hear talk of, you know, changing the structure of that, there needs to be really care taken between, you know, efficiency in these normal times, which I know the last couple of years we haven't been talking about, but that's 99% of the time, with resiliency during disruption. So I hope the talk is much more tweaks to the current system than wholesale changes, certainly. I highlight that in a paper we did with USDA to say, you know, I took so many calls during COVID saying, you know, the supply chain is broken, so on and so forth. Well, I think the data bears out that it's pretty darn resilient, right? And that if there is changes, there's just some minor changes there. Now, as we look at the current environment, I think when you look at non-federally inspected slaughter, which is a tiny amount of slaughter, in reality for hogs, it's about 60,000 head per month. But I think it's really indicative of the market, because non-federally inspected hog slaughter is back to pre-pandemic levels. It got really high here because we needed to find alternative markets because of the processing slowdown. Now, cattle, that's not the case. Cattle, it's still at levels of the pandemic, which suggests there's challenges in processing capacity. Both the need for, I think, additional capacity, which was already planned pre-pandemic, about 5,000 head per day, as well as working through some of the current operational challenges. So when I look what really drives prices, when you think about the interplay between production and processing, it's this processing capacity utilization. And this is a moving target. Industries are always chasing it. Hog processing is in a very healthy place currently, though. Now that's come because we have less supplies and we're doing a better job operating those plants. So processing capacity utilization is much lower relative to COVID. And what that causes is higher prices. So you can run a simple model of just price and capacity utilization. As utilization declines 1%, prices increase 1.8%. And this is a very obvious pattern as you look back at 1998. As you look at 2008, this is 2014 right there. Now, going forward, you know, I think it's important to understand that if supplies increase, this capacity utilization also increases too. So, you know, that doesn't say that we should be shuttering plants now, just because there is, you know, maybe a little bit of excess capacity, especially because if there is excess, it's in the physical, it's not, certainly not in the operational capacity. And the economics of it are very important. So while packer margins get talked a lot about in cattle and hogs, those margins, I'll argue from a net standpoint, are break even long run. Because what gets talked a lot about is this gross margin, right? Because it's really easy to calculate. Take the price of the product, be it pork, be it beef, You add the byproducts and you subtract out the animal price. Now, I'll argue we should be careful about what animal price we're using and what pork price we're using, because we don't just do negotiated. There's a combination of a lot of different ways we buy and sell pork and animals. But even after accounting for that, what fails a lot of times is these other costs. So just like producers, their costs are increased much, but packer costs have increased notably. When you start accounting for those, or just simple estimates of those, because no packer's calling me up and saying this is my cost, so I just have to use some fixed numbers. Those numbers get pretty close to breaking longer run. I think that's where we're entering right now. So if we're adding additional capacity now, likely higher cost capacity, what does that look like as those margins get much, much tighter? Want to end with just a little discussion of how we price hogs, how we price pork, and what's referred to as livestock mandatory reporting. So that's the data that I get to geek out over and play with and help understand the markets. And every 5 years, we get a chance to reauthorize the provision of that data. And that's the easiest time to make some changes to that. And I think COVID highlighted some possible changes to that, and some of the current environment, some of the issues we're talking about also highlight the need to make some of those changes. We have a paper, a grad student of mine, Ezra Butcher, did for a guy working in pork and beef. That's a great name, right? So he's kind of got street credit before he even starts the job. But we looked at hog prices and volume comparisons really over the history of this data, well, at least going back to 2010, and look at especially COVID situation. An artifact of this analysis was Ezra's really good in computer programming, so he built this tool. He actually did it before he even told me he was going to do it, and then I think he just wanted to kind of show that he could, or prove that he could do it. I said, hey, that's great. Like, USDA provides a price distribution report, but if you want to compare week to week or month to month, you have to pull up all the individual reports. And sometimes it's not easy to really compare those if your screen isn't really big or anything. And so you can look at that distribution of those prices in this tool that Ezra built. So I'm just comparing February of 2020, 2021, and 2022. You'll see that prices have, across those 3 years, have increased notably. It's a little more difficult to see that negotiated prices are at the bottom of the tail here, and they work up closer to the middle and even some of the top of the tail here, as supplies are tighter and packers are bidding stronger and looking for more things. This tool is really cool in kind of showing the changes in that distribution, providing a bit more transparency in these volumes and prices that are available. Again, this is all data that's already being reported by USDA. It's just hopefully a little bit cleaner and tool to use. So we can look at both the price and the quantity of that LMR data. This is the way that hogs are sold. We have packer-owned hogs, which represent just less than 40% of the hogs nationally. And then you have the 4 producer categories, which the largest is the swine or pork market formula. So that's something like the Western Core Belt, plus or minus, plus usually. That's part of the formula, and then it could be a percentage of the cutout. It could be one or the other. It could be a combination of those. That's the highest at about 30% there. Now you'll see negotiated has continued to decline, and we're about 1.5% of the total hogs, a little over 2% when you look at just producer sold. Now, when you look at some of these volumes here, you'll notice some changes that happened. So if you go back to April 2016, you may say, well, we had over 40% swine or pork market formula. What happened overnight? All of a sudden, we just started selling hogs a lot differently. Did we have a major producer stop selling hogs, or a major buyer stop selling hogs? What happened there? Well, this was a case where USDA, they look at the data, they try to understand what's going on in the marketplace, and they want that marketplace to be reflective of the conditions out there and allow producers to understand both quantities and prices and help benchmark how they're selling hogs. So prior to April 2016, hogs that were sold without ractopamine and or antibiotics were included in the swine or pork market formula, because a lot of times that was the base price, right? That's how I got to the base price, and then I added a premium for raised without whatever. Well, in April 2016, by that time, that volume had gotten larger and larger, and notable enough where to make these more uniform, comparing apples to apples, it made a lot of sense to put those hogs in the other purchase arrangement, because that's where hogs with those types of premiums or those types of attributes were categorized. That's why you've seen the jump there and the decline there. Now, we also seen some changes in 2017. Lean hog index-based sales were classified from the other market formula, which those are hogs based on the futures or options market, were put into this swine or pork market formula. Similarly, in 2019, see pork cutout index-based sales were put in that swine pork market formula. Now, as I look at some possible changes we can think about to make these categories more homogeneous and have implications for how futures contracts are settled, is looking at the lean hog contract. How we cash settle it is the swine or pork market formula and negotiated hogs. Well, I told you already, negotiated hogs is a very small percentage. But this swine or pork market formula includes swine formula and pork formula. But we have a lean hog index. We actually have a pork cutout contract and a lean hog contract. So with the change to LMR, you could break these out, just like USDA did with these sales here. So you could have a swine formula, pork formula. Now it's not as easy as that, because what do you do with the combos, right? If it's a majority of one, you put it in that, or you have a third category, that's the combo. So it's not as clean as maybe just breaking those out, but I think that's a possible thing to think about and a change that can be made. Why does that have implications? Well, you could go to the lean hog index just being a swine formula then, so apples to apples. Or you could keep it the way it is and still use the swine formula, the pork formula. It's a weighted average anyway, so you can just take that weighted average. Now, whatever is decided, if you do break them up, obviously there's implications for basis and understanding historical basis levels and how you're going to use basis levels moving forward. Another possible tweak to LMR, I think, as we talk about more and more non-carcass merit premium programs, is possibly breaking out this other category. So since 2017, USDA has released a category that is a combo for all of these non-carcass merit premiums. It's a laundry list, right? But I don't know for this premium, which for at least one packer's offering almost nothing, another packer's offering over $30. Now this is likely a combo, right? A lot of different characteristics. I don't know what is driving this, right? So is that all antibiotic free? Is it all animal welfare? What are the weights on that, right? If I wanted to do a weighted average, I know overall it's about $5, but is that just because several of these are pretty small and then I got a big one that's $60 per 100? I don't know. Now the reason why USDA has to put it into this combo is for confidentiality, because they can't release data from an individual packer, individual producer. A lot of times the packer is the least common denominator, right? So there might not be enough sales on a particular week here where you couldn't solve for which packer that category was. They have a statistical procedure that tells them if those restrictions are met or not. I would argue I don't need to know this premium, and I say I don't, but I don't think the industry needs to know a weekly premium necessarily, right? If I could get each category by itself, maybe monthly would be fine, right? Or even quarterly, because I would get more weeks of transactions, more packers included in there. It would allow me to better understand what the value proposition of these categories are. And so as we talk about, Prop 12, that's where this is gonna go, right? The premium paid for that. But as currently structured, I don't know what the premium is there. Equally for the pork. So USDA came out and said, for Prop 12 compliant pork, it's going in the specialty category that we created in 2019. That's 5% of the value. So once we know it starts to be categorized in there, we can probably have a good idea what the percentage is initially, because you'll know what the jump is, you know those exact dates. But this has been growing generally over time. It's kind of too many short years to really draw a trend there. But if these products become more and more popular, it'll be difficult to know the true volume of all of these categories. Similarly, it's going to be difficult to know the true value of what this pork being sold is using this LMR data. So I'll end there. Resources that we regularly update that were highlighted here. And I'll leave you with this. A lot of the shortage discussion was probably speaking to the choir, because the producers, I know, are very entrepreneurial, and they find shortage, they see shortages, they see opportunity, right? So I know many of you know what a phone book or Sears catalog is, right?